At approximately 2:45 on Tuesday, March 12, 2014, I was dispatched to the Bay Valley Hospital emergency room for a possible domestic violence assault. I arrived at the Bay Valley Hospital emergency entrance at 2:57. I made contact with Nurse Betty Sweet. RN Sweet provided me with the alleged victim's basic information and emergency contact person, her mother, Nancy Johnson. RN Sweet stated that Kelly was brought to the hospital by her parents, Nancy and John Johnson. Kelly Johnson is 5'5", 115 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes, tan skin complexion, with a date of birth of July 7, 1992. Nurse Sweet stated that at the time of my arrival, the victim is stable, but in a lot of pain and has been sedated and unable to communicate at this time. I made contact with Nancy and John Johnson. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson explained they were woke up by a phone call from their daughter Kelly at approximately 2 a.m. Mr. Johnson stated that Kelly had recently moved in with her boyfriend, Nick Smith. The two had been in a relationship for over 2.5 years and had one daughter in common, Annabelle Johnson Smith, 2 years of age. Their daughter, Kelly, had called to say that Nick and she were arguing and asked if her parents would please come and get Annabelle. Mr. Johnson stated that he could hear Nick yelling at Kelly through the telephone. Mr. Johnson stated that he believed Nick to be intoxicated based on the way he sounded on the phone. Mr. Johnson stated he had not known of Nick and Kelly to have a violent relationship. Mr. Johnson said that when he and his wife arrived at the apartment that Kelly and Nick shared, the door was unlocked and his wife walked in. He heard his wife scream and he came running. Mr. Johnson said there was blood on the wall in the kitchen where he and his wife found his daughter on the floor. Mr. Johnson said they yelled for Nick for a few times with no response. Ms. Johnson went into the bedroom that Kelly and Nick shared to find Annabelle in her crib asleep. Ms. Johnson is now holding Annabelle during this interview to keep her asleep. Mr. Johnson said Kelly's right eye was swollen and there was a lot of blood on Kelly's face. Ms. Johnson made the determination that Kelly needed to come to the hospital. I retrieved the address to the apartment, 210 South Street, apartment number 2 in Jonesville, Michigan, from Ms. Johnson, whom stated she locked the door when she left the apartment and offered me a key. I took the key to ensure I could get in to collect evidence and pictures. I then went to the apartment to further investigate as Kelly was still sedated. Upon my arrival to the apartment at 210 South Street, number 2 in Jonesville, I knocked on the door several times, identifying myself as Officer Cavill with the Metropolitan Police Department. I received no response. I used the key Miss Nancy Johnson gave me to enter the apartment. I walked into the living room to find the couch on the left of the room. The cushions were pushed off the base of the couch and onto the floor. The reclining chair on the right side of the room had been tipped onto its back. I walked through the living room and into the kitchen, noticing the blood smears and drops. Please see the attached photos. I entered the bathroom. This room appeared to be intact. I took several pictures. I noticed the bedroom door was slightly pushed open. I further pushed open the door to a rumbling noise inside. I turned on the light switch to see a approximately 5'10" male subject weighing roughly 210 pounds snoring on the bed. I again announced myself, to which the subject did not respond. I radioed dispatch for an ambulance. I contacted the sergeant on duty to notify him of the situation. The sergeant said he would send an officer to meet me and the subject at the emergency room at the Bay Valley Hospital. The emergency medical treatment team inserted IVs into the subject and conveyed him to the emergency room. I followed in my patrol vehicle. I located Mr. and Mrs. Johnson and returned the key to the apartment. I then met the subject and nurses in a secondary secured intake area. The subject became conscious. I identified myself as Officer Cavill and asked who he was. The subject identified himself as Nick Smith and asked if I would contact Kelly Johnson to come and get him. I asked Nick if he knew the events of the evening. Nick began to tell me what he said he could recall. Nick told me his friends had come to pick him up at approximately 6 p.m. to go to dinner to have a guys' night. Kelly was staying home with Annabelle. He left with his friend to attend several establishments throughout the evening. Nick said that he and his friends had dinner at Benihana's and drank a few adult beverages with dinner. They then went to the town bar to watch a live band and have more drinks. Nick believed that he and his friends were at the town bar for quite a while. The group then went to an adult entertainment club. Nick said he knew Kelly would be upset with him, so he had one of his friends bring him home. When he arrived at the apartment at approximately 1 a.m., the neighbor from apartment 4 was on the couch. Nick could not remember his name, but did refer to him as Dark Knight. Nick was intoxicated, and he and Kelly engaged in a verbal argument. Kelly called her parents to come and get Annabelle because she was going to hang with Dark Knight. Nick was upset with this and called his friend Zach Wilson to come and pick him up. Nick believes that Zach arrived approximately 1:15 to pick him up. Nick said he and Zach went back to the gentleman's club to hang with the rest of the guys. I asked for Zach's number, to which was given to me by Nick. 123-123-1234. Zach's story was very similar to Nick's. Nick's timeline could be confirmed based on the incoming and outgoing phone calls listed on the cell phone. I asked Nick about the state of his apartment. Nick said he was really drunk when he came home and could not remember even coming home. I was contacted by Miss Nancy Johnson that Kelly was waking up. I then went to Kelly's room to speak with her. Kelly confirms that Dark Knight had been in their apartment with her and Annabelle, and Nick was not happy. Kelly confirmed that Nick did not hit her and he had left with his friend when she called her parents so she could go over to a house party at Dark Knight's house. Kelly could not recall Dark Knight's real name. I went back to the apartment complex to locate Dark Knight in apartment number 4. I arrived at approximately 3:45 a.m. I asked if I could speak to Dark Knight, at which time a gentleman identified himself as Jeremy Jones. Mr. Jones stated several people referred to him as Dark Knight. I asked Jeremy if he could tell me what happened during the last 24 hours of his day. Jeremy began by saying it was his birthday and he had planned a huge party. Jeremy invited the neighbors over, but the guy was gone and the girl had to stay home with the baby. I asked if he knew the couple's names. Jeremy said Nick and Nora. I agreed to the gentleman's name being Nick, however, the girl was not named Nora. Jeremy corrected himself, stating that her name was Kelsey or Kelly. I confirmed Kelly. I asked if Kelly ever made it to his party. Jeremy said she did not. Jeremy stated he went back to the apartment and Nick was still not home. Jeremy and Kelly visited for a while and Kelly began to get upset and hit him several times about the face and head. I asked Jeremy if he hit Kelly. He confirms that he did strike her once about the arms to get her off of him. I asked if there were any injuries sustained from this particular strike. Jeremy said he was not sure. I asked Jeremy if he saw an ambulance at Kelly's apartment. Jeremy said he did not. I asked if he knew what time Nick came home. Jeremy said he did not see Nick come home. I told Jeremy that he was being questioned because Kelly was in the hospital with several injuries. Jeremy asked that the questioning stop so he could contact his attorney. Based on the information provided, I arrested Jeremy and took him to the station to be further questioned and interviewed. The report was completed at 4:15 on 3/12/14, signed by myself, Lindsay Cavill.